There's a particular kind of silence that happens when you scroll past someone you used to know and realize they've already built a life you were still planning. It isn't loud, it doesn't break you. It just sits somewhere behind your ribs for the rest of the afternoon, quietly rearranging how you feel about yourself. You tell yourself you're happy for them, you mostly are, but underneath that, a quieter voice asks a question you don't want to answer out loud. Why am I still here? Why does everything take me longer? Why do I keep arriving at rooms other people left years ago? And the culture has an answer ready for you. You were lazy. You were distracted. You wasted time. You didn't want it enough. You made the wrong choices. You should have started earlier, pushed harder, optimized sooner. It's a clean story. It blames you, which feels almost comforting, because at least it implies you had control. But I want to offer a different possibility. One that is harder to hear, not because it is cruel, but because it is accurate. You didn't fall behind. You were built on a different schedule. And nobody ever told you that was allowed. Most of what we call being on time in life is not a biological fact. It's a cultural agreement. Graduate at 22, career by 25, married by 30, house by 35, figured out by 40. These numbers feel natural because they're repeated so often, but if you look at them closely, they are completely arbitrary. They were shaped by economic conditions that no longer exist, family structures that have already dissolved, and industrial rhythms designed for a workforce that behaved like machinery.
The timeline was built for a world that isn't here anymore, but the expectation survived. And now an entire generation is being measured against a clock that stopped making sense before they were born. That's the first thing worth understanding. You are not late to a real race. You are late to a fiction. But there's a second layer, and this one is more personal.
Human beings do not develop on a single track. Neuroscience has known this for a long time, even if the culture refuses to absorb it. Some nervous systems mature early and plateau. Others mature slowly and keep expanding well into what we've been told is the second half of life. Some people are wired for fast pattern recognition and quick decisions. Others are wired for deep processing, slow integration, long incubation. Neither is better. But only one of them is rewarded by a school system built on speed. And only one of them is celebrated by a culture that confuses velocity with worth. If you're the second kind, you spent your entire early life being told something was wrong with you. You took longer to finish things. You needed more time to understand what you actually wanted. You couldn't commit to a career at 19 because you didn't yet know who you were at 19. You watched classmates lock into identities while yours was still forming. And you mistook their certainty for maturity when often it was just early closure. Early closure looks like success from the outside. Someone picks a path at 20, commits hard, and builds visible momentum. We applaud it. But a significant number of those people wake up at 35 inside a life they chose before they knew themselves, and they spend the next decade quietly dismantling it. You don't see that part. You only see the LinkedIn version.
Meanwhile, the slow builder, the person who kept asking questions longer, who refused to commit to the wrong thing, who needed more data before locking in, gets labeled as directionless, indecisive, behind. But they're not behind. They're doing something the fast track doesn't allow. They're waiting for the real signal.
There's a reason late bloomers exist as a recognizable pattern in every field. Writers who didn't find their voice until their 40s. Scientists whose best work came after a decade of wandering. Founders who failed at 3 things before building the one that mattered. These aren't exceptions. They're evidence of a different developmental architecture. One that trades early output for later depth. One that looks unproductive in the short term and disproportionate in the long term. The problem is that we only measure the short term. And in the short term, the slow builder looks like they're losing. Now, here's where it gets uncomfortable. Even if you accept all of this intellectually, there's still a part of you that doesn't believe it. Because the shame isn't logical, it's environmental. You absorbed it before you had the tools to question it. Every time a relative asked what you were doing with your life, every time a friend announced a milestone, every time an algorithm served you someone younger and more accomplished, those moments didn't just pass through you. They calibrated your internal sense of worth against a timeline you never agreed to. And that calibration is the real damage, not the lateness itself. The lateness was never the problem. The problem is that you've been running your own life while secretly believing you're defective for running it at your own speed. That belief costs more than you think. It makes you rush decisions that shouldn't be rushed. It makes you commit to wrong people, wrong jobs, wrong cities, just to feel like you've caught up. It makes you abandon slow-growing work right before it would have paid off, because the growth wasn't fast enough to quiet the voice that says you're behind. The timeline anxiety doesn't just hurt you emotionally. It actively pulls you away from the life you would have built if you trusted your own pace. And here's the part that almost nobody says clearly. Some of the most important things in a human life cannot be rushed. They don't respond to pressure. They don't care about your deadlines. Self-knowledge takes time. Real skill takes time. A nervous system that can handle success takes time. A relationship with your own mind takes time. A clear sense of what you actually want, separated from what you were trained to want, takes time. If you force these things early, you get a cheaper version of them. You get identity without substance, ambition without direction, achievement without meaning. You get the appearance of being on time and the private experience of being lost. The people who seem to have it all figured out at 25 are often running on borrowed certainty. Certainty inherited from parents, from prestige, from momentum, from fear of stopping long enough to ask whether any of it is actually theirs. Sometimes that certainty holds, often it doesn't. And when it cracks quietly, in the years when no one is watching anymore, when the applause has moved on to the next young achiever. You were not built for borrowed certainty. That's why it never fit. That's why you kept hesitating, kept questioning, kept refusing to close the door on who you might become. It wasn't weakness. It was a kind of integrity you didn't have a name for yet. None of this means you should be passive. None of this is an excuse to drift indefinitely and call it depth. There's a real difference between slow development and avoidance. And part of being honest with yourself is knowing which one you're in. Slow development still moves. It still commits. It still finishes things. It just does so on a timeline that respects how you actually work instead of how the culture demands you perform. What changes is the measurement. You stop measuring your life against people whose architecture is different from yours. You stop treating every year you didn't arrive as a year you wasted. You start paying attention to the quieter evidence, the depth you've built, the mistakes you avoided by not rushing, the self-knowledge that took a decade to earn and that someone on the fast track may never have the time to develop. This reframe is not a consolation prize. It's a correction. You were comparing yourself to a schedule that was never yours, using metrics that were never neutral, inside a story that was never true. The truth is simpler and harder. Some people are built to move fast and peak early. Some people are built to move slow and peak late. Some people are built to never peak in any visible way, but to deepen steadily for the entire length of their life. All three are valid. Only one of them gets celebrated. That's a cultural problem, not a personal one. So when you feel that familiar ache of being behind, try to notice what's actually happening. It's not evidence of failure. It's evidence that you've been holding yourself to a standard designed for a different kind of person in a different kind of economy, running on a different kind of nervous system. The ache is real. The verdict it delivers is false. You were never late. You were early to things no one was measuring. You were building something the timeline couldn't see. And the reason it took longer is the same reason it will last longer. The people who rushed got there first. That doesn't mean they got there better. And it certainly doesn't mean the destination they reached is the one you were walking toward. You can stop apologizing for your pace now. Not because you finally earned the right to, but because you never needed the permission in the first place. The clock you've been checking was never yours. It was just the loudest one in the room. Put it down and keep walking at the speed you were actually built for.